I imagine the DEA find over. I don't know who that is at the teak driveway down there, but go arrest him.
All right, here we go. Okay, welcome to the special and regular meeting of the Pacifica Planning Commission for November 19th, 2018.
19. Also.
Oh, it's
It's the 19th.
November 19th. What was I looking at? Oh, yeah, thank you. Bad eyes. Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Stedgink.
Here.
Vice Chair Clifford.
Present.
Chair Campbell.
Here.
Commissioner Gordon.
Here.
Commissioner Diblin.
Here.
Commissioner Kraske.
Here.
Okay, let's have the salute to the flag. Commissioner Clifford, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Clifford. All right, on to the approval of the order of agenda. All right, Commissioner Gordon,
I'll move that we approve the order of agenda.
Commissioner Clifford.
I'll second that.
All right, we've had a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimous. Next up, approval of the minutes. All right, Commissioner Stedgick.
Move to approve the minutes.
Commissioner Clifford.
I'll second that.
Had a motion and a second. Please vote.
There's no minutes.
Well, it says it right here. You're right, though. There is none.
We
All right.
approved them anyway.
Let's approve them anyway.
Just trying to get to the hearing. All right. Designation of a liaison to the city council meeting. There is none.
None needed.
Yes, thank you. I caught that one this time. Oral communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda tonight. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. And I'm looking through the speaker cards to see if we have anything not on the agenda tonight. And I do not see any. Okay. So we are going to close oral communications and move on. There are no consent items, so we're going straight to the consideration item for tonight. And that is the draft local coastal program policies relating to sea level rise adaptation. The city has prepared a draft local coastal program policies relating to sea level rise adaptation. And the recommended CEQA action tonight is not applicable And recommended action also is to provide comments on the draft LCP policies relating to sea level rise adaptation for City Council consideration on December 10th, 2018. All right, Commissioner Communications, please.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I am Associate Planner Bonnie O'Connor. Tonight I will be presenting the process and policies that the city has been developing over the last 14 months regarding adapting to sea level rise. The presentation tonight will review the purpose of tonight's meeting, review the project background, stakeholder engagement, project deliverables, overview of the draft policies, next steps, and the Commission's action. I recognize the abundance of information that I will be providing you tonight, so please feel free to stop me at any time to ask questions. In addition to Planning Director Wehrmeister, City Manager Woodhouse, and Assistant City Attorney Bazzano, we have the following consultants available to help answer questions: Bob Battaglio, Project Director with ESA, and Charles Lester, Coastal Policy and Planning Expert. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to collect comments from the Planning Commission regarding the draft Local Coastal Program Policies, or LCP policies, related to sea level rise adaptation. These comments will be provided to the Council for the consideration prior to requesting direction from the Council to incorporate these policies into the 2014 LCP update document to create a 2019 LCP update document. Starting with document history, the city is currently operating under an LCP from 1980. In 2009, the city began the process of updating the general plan and local coastal program. In 2014, draft documents were prepared but not adopted, and staff was directed by City Council to conduct additional community engagement. Since that time, state regulatory requirements have changed and now require climate change adaptation and planning documents. Governor Brown approved Senate Bill 379, which requires local agencies to address climate adaptation and resiliency in long-range planning documents, and Governor's Executive Order number B-30-15 directed state agencies to factor climate change into planning decisions. The 2014 draft LCP does not include detailed policies relating to sea level rise adaptation. So what is an LCP? Under the California Coastal Act of 1976, the California Coastal Commission has decision-making and permit authority in the coastal zone. The coastal zone was mapped by the California legislator as part of the Coastal Act. As shown in this figure, the Pacifica's coastal zone is all property west of Highway 1 and one small area on the east side of the highway across from Maury Point. The Coastal Act provides for the adoption of an LCP by cities and counties in conformance with the Coastal Act. And once certified by the Coastal Commission, the LCP transfers permitting authority to the local jurisdictions. This is important in retaining local control over decisions that impact the community and acknowledges the unique characteristics of local communities and regional interests within the framework of the Coastal Act. The Coastal Act clearly states that the Coastal Commission maintains review authority over tidelands, submerged lands, or on public trust lands. The LCP covers various topics, including but not limited to land use, public access, recreation, environmental and scenic resources, and natural hazards. Pacifica has experienced damage from coastal flooding and erosion hazards. The coastal erosion along Esplanade Avenue is likely one of Pacifica's most notorious examples. In response to these hazards, the city and private property owners have employed various approaches. In March 2018, the City Council unanimously adopted the following goals to help guide the direction of the planning effort for the draft LCP update and adaptation planning. A summary of the goals include bolster efficacy of public safety efforts, respond to climate change, preserve existing neighborhoods and promote environmental justice and local economic vitality, preserve and enhance coastal access. The city applied for and received a local assistance grant from the California Coastal Commission and the California Coastal Conservancy. The scope of work and budget of the grant agreement assigned $185,000 of $185,000 of the funds for consultant assistance. The grant agreement was fully executed in May 2017. In June 2017, the city issued a request for proposals for professional consultant services. The proposals were received from 3 firms. Staff recommended that the contract be awarded to ESA. The council approved ESA's contract in 2017. A stakeholder engagement plan was prepared by consultants at the start of this planning effort to identify community engagement objectives for the LCP update and outline specific activities to achieve those objectives. The stakeholder engagement plan was informed by interviews the consultant conducted with various stakeholders, including the City of Pacifica Council members, Pacifica Chamber of Commerce, Real Estate Community, San Francisco Public Golf Alliance, Pacifica Environmental Family, and the Surfrider Foundation. The stakeholder engagement activities included a council ad hoc committee, a community work group, a technical work group, public workshops, public outreach, education and notification, and Coastal Commission coordination. In July 2017, the council appointed John Keener and Sue Vaterlos to an ad hoc subcommittee on an as-needed basis to provide guidance on community communications and outreach and other administrative steps in the process. The city created a 16-member community work group from a list of applicants to characterize a broad and balanced representation of stakeholders in Pacifica. The purpose of creating this group was to ensure that the city received input from various stakeholders of Pacifica. The community work group members were selected in part based on their ability to reach out to their affiliated community groups, neighbors, and other hard-to-reach stakeholders on behalf of the city. The city invited various representatives from federal, state, and local agencies to participate in the technical work group. The technical work group meetings provided a venue for productive interagency coordination and collaboration. Agency attendance varied between the 3 technical work group meetings, but attendees included the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Geological Survey, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, California Coastal Commission, Caltrans, California Coastal Conservancy, California Office of Emergency Services, California State Parks, California State Lands Commission, County of San Mateo, San Francisco Department of Recreation and Parks, and various Pacifica Department members. Public workshops were held to educate the public on planning efforts and provide them an opportunity to review, discuss, and comment on draft versions of the city's major milestone documents and background documents. Workshops were open to the public and often provided an opportunity for members of the public to have their questions answered. The city used several public outreach methods to inform the public of the city's sea level rise planning effort. These efforts included a citywide mailer, public meetings, continuous updates to the Sea Level Rise webpage, continuous updates sent to the Sea Level Rise mailing list, regular mentions in the Connect with Pacifica e-newsletter, Pacifica Tribune notices, multiple mentions from the city and community work group members in the Pacifica Tribune, multiple posts on Nextdoor, multiple discussions at city council meetings, posting public meetings on YouTube. Staff attended local special events to specifically talk about this topic. Highway 1 electronic message sign, custom business cards with Sea Level Rise website and general information, which were distributed by the community work group members and staff, postings at the planning department, a GIS web viewer of hazards and asset data available on the Sea Level Rise webpage, and extra staff meetings with neighbor representatives and organizations who requested meetings, notably the Shoreview neighborhood and representatives of the Fairway West neighborhoods and the San Mateo County Association of Realtors. A summary of the public meetings is provided here. The council-approved grant agreement included a total of 9 public outreach meetings. In March 2018, the City Council unanimously approved funds to support 2 additional meetings. In October 2018, the Council approved the funding for a third extra meeting, which occurred during the Adaptation Plan phase of the project. City and Coastal Commission staff coordinated throughout the planning effort in accordance with the grant agreement. Coordination included Coastal Commission review of administrative draft copies of major deliverables, phone calls on an as-needed basis, and a submittal of quarterly progress reports to Coastal Commission staff. The Coastal Commission staff also participated in the technical work group meetings. While staff reviewed, considered, and incorporated Coastal Commission staff's input where appropriate, staff also balanced that input from all stakeholders, including the members of the working groups, the public, and ultimately prepared LCP policies that meet the needs and goals of Pacifica within applicable regulatory and legal confines. The scope and process of the planning effort was defined in the grant agreement and is consistent with the process recommended by the Coastal Commission guidance. The scope included the phases shown here. Each phase provided information that was used in succeeding phases. The vulnerability assessment and the adaptation plan documents served as background documents to inform and support the selection of sea level rise adaptation policies. The vulnerability assessment focused on determining the potential exposure of assets to flooding and erosion hazards under 6 sea level rise scenarios, which included no sea level rise / existing conditions, as well as 5 state recommended scenarios, and tabulated asset exposures within the 8 subareas. The adaptation plan provides modeling results from the selected feasible adaptation strategies for each subarea. The adaptation plan identifies environmental triggers for adaptation and cost-benefit analysis of implementation. In accordance with the city's grant agreement, a managed retreat adaptation strategy was evaluated for each subarea. This document was prepared to inform decision-making about sea level rise adaptation policies and is not a policy document. The draft LCP policies relating to sea level rise were drafted with consideration given to technical results, community input, and state law. The policies focused on protection and armoring of the shoreline and reassessment of the adaptation plan in the future. The policies provide more direction for monitoring and responding to coastal hazards, more clarification of requirements, and a stronger plan to support protection of our city's existing development. Attachment A of the staff report provides a summary comparison of the existing LCP policies compared to the draft LCP policies. As further detailed in that attachment, both the existing and proposed draft LCP policies include the key Coastal Act policies 30235 and 30253. They both require new projects to be sited to be safe for a design life of 100 years, prohibit the approval of projects which require seawalls as mitigation, and states that projects should not be approved which eventually will need seawalls for the safety of the structure and residents. And both policies include a transfer of development right process. Touching on a few of the draft LCP policies, policy number 4 states that the city shall implement its adaptation plan as expressed in the LCP's general and sub-area coastal hazard adaptation policies. As mentioned before, the adaptation plan does evaluate managed retreat strategies in each sub-area in accordance with the city's grant agreement with the Coastal Commission. The adaptation plan is an informative document and not a policy document. None of the policies drafted for the draft LCP update include managed retreat strategies. The policies support protection and accommodation measures for existing development and avoidance for new development. Policies 5 and 6 would direct the city to implement a monitoring program for adaptation strategies to record the success of adaptation efforts. The adaptation plan would be reassessed regularly using the data collected from this monitoring. Policy 7 would direct the city to establish a mitigation program to identify enforceable measures to achieve proportional mitigation of resource impacts. Policy 8 would direct the city to establish a funding source through outside agency grants or a local source. Each sub-area has a specific approach based on environmental conditions and development context. Most follow the same pattern of maintaining and expanding armoring in near term with supplemental beach replenishment. Policies may identify specific actions such as flood protection for West Sharp Park. None of the sub-area adaptation policies include managed retreat. There are policies addressing new developments along shorelines regarding siting and design standards, assumption of risk and no future seawall commitment for new developments, avoidance of public trust lands, prohibition on bluff-face developments, requiring non-conforming structures to conform, and protection of private property, prohibiting the taking of private property. There are policies addressing shoreline protective structures regarding encouraging softer protection strategies, implementing a beach replenishment program, providing for repair and maintenance of existing seawalls, allowing armoring for existing development with monitoring and mitigate impacts individually or through the city's program, and limiting authorization of shoreline structures to the life of the structure being protected. There are policies addressing coastal flooding and other hazards, including complying with the city's flood hazard ordinance, facilitating flood proofing of the structures in flood zones, discouraging development on steep slopes, avoiding active seismic faults, addressing hazards in tsunami run-up zones, and addressing drainage and bluff erosion. To help demonstrate how these draft policies may affect different properties, the presentation includes 3 case scenarios. This first is for a private residence along the shoreline. In this case scenario, a property owner of a pre-Coastal Act private residential development on the shoreline with an existing protection structure, such as a rock revetment, in Northwest Sharp Park wants to remodel their home and wants to increase the coastal protection of their residents because they occasionally experience wave overtopping. I won't go through the policy comparisons shown here, but what is easily seen is that a property owner will have many more policies that will direct them and support them in protecting their residents. The takeaway from this scenario is that a private resident would have clearly written and direct policies that would support the maintenance and expansion of their shoreline protection structures, which would provide confidence that the city would be supportive of this improvement. They would have the option of implementing supplemental adaptation strategies, such as soft protection measures and elevating the development to address coastal hazards. And they would have a clear understanding of technical report, mitigation, and monitoring requirements prior to proceeding with permitting processes, reducing the unknowns associated with the process. In case scenario 2, an inland residence outside of any projected hazard zone, but within the coastal zone, is concerned about how these policies will affect their property. The difference in policies here is that a study has been conducted using best available science, which shows that their property is not projected to be impacted by coastal hazards through the year 2100. The takeaway for this scenario is that a private resident would have more information at their disposal to prove that their property is not projected to be impacted by coastal hazards through the year 2100 based on best available science, and would not be applicable to these policies. In the last case scenario, we look at what the policies would do for the city in the expansion of an existing publicly owned shoreline structure in West Sharp Park, protecting pre-Coastal Act development, such as Beach Boulevard, street, and infrastructure. Again, I won't go through the policy comparison, but what is easily seen is that the city will have many more policies that will direct them and support them in protecting the public shoreline. The takeaway for this scenario is that the city would have a well-developed plan for adapting to sea level rise, which would be extremely beneficial when applying for grants and other funding support, would have environmental triggers to use to time the implementation of adaptation strategies appropriately, and monitoring data to identify when environmental triggers are hit, would have clearly written and direct policies that would support the maintenance and expansion of their shoreline protection structures, which would provide confidence to prospective adjacent residents and businesses. Would provide confidence to prospective adjacent residents and businesses that the city will protect the public shoreline. We'll have the option of implementing soft protection adaptation strategies to supplement and prolong the life of hard protection adaptation strategies, and would have a clear understanding of technical report, mitigation, and monitoring requirements prior to proceeding with the permitting process. The LCP policies related to sea level rise adaptation are only a portion of the policies included in the LCP. Staff will commence an effort to refamiliarize the Council, Planning Commission, and the public on the remaining portions of the 2014 draft LCP in 2019. As part of that effort, the draft LCP policies related to sea level rise will be incorporated into the 2014 draft LCP document to create the 2019 draft LCP. The whole 2019 draft LCP will be brought to the Planning Commission for a recommendation to the City Council for approval. Again, the Commission's action tonight is to provide comments on the draft LCP policies relating to the sea level rise adaptation for City Council's consideration. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, questions for staff? Commissioner Nevlin.
Just one really quick one at this point. I just wanted to make sure, I heard the term a few times. I think I know what it means, but I just want to make sure we're all understanding the same thing. Numerous references to soft protection measures. Could you just clarify what you mean by that term?
Beach replenishment.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so we'll move right into the public hearing. All right, we'll start off with Dominique Waldell, followed by Julie Ulmer. Sorry if I mispronounced that. So Dominique Waldell.
So I'm coming late to this subject, and I just wanted to say that I'm not too sure why we have to rush towards the 10th when we will have a new city council. You know, a lot of us have really busy lives, and these are coming, and I see there's all these stakeholder options of people being involved, and I have to tell you, I don't remember the highway sign talking about stakeholder meetings or anything, so it's just really... into the future of West Fairway Park, where most of us are really going to be affected by this. There's terms that, oh, we live on the beach, it's so nice, but you know, most of us live in little homes, and I have a disabled husband, we're on a single income. This is our long-term care policy. So if it gets mucked up because someone later says, oh, it's going to have a problem, there goes my equity, there goes everything. So my question is, why cannot this wait until we have a full new city council? Thank you.
And I know there's a lot of enthusiasm out in the audience tonight, but if we clap for everybody, we're going to be here really late. So everybody's got 3 minutes, by the way. All right. Julie Ulmer.
Julie Ulmer. I also live in West Fairway, and I just want to echo what Dominic said, is that we hope to wait so that we can all be more educated. I've been on the board of the Resource Center. I'm currently on the board of IBL. I'm an active community member. I take advantage of learning, especially when it's going to directly affect me, and I just am also new to this, that this is such a huge effect on so many people, and to give us the benefit of having a little bit more time to understand more deeply how it's going to affect us, because ultimately this is going to affect us, whether it's today, tomorrow, or it's for our kids who are going to inherit our homes as our major assets. So I hope that you will consider giving us a little bit more time to understand so that our voices are heard. I know we have an amazing community. We have a couple of people that really stood up and brought us together, and that can happen throughout Pacifica, and I think you can get a true buy-in from our community to really understand this and not make people angry, to make people understand and support whatever plan that we come up with as a group. So I hope you will really consider pushing this back so that we take the time. We've now shown up at the meetings that we understand that we need to understand. I still am very confused about so many things, and I'd love to understand more. So thank you for considering pushing the vote out.
Thank you. All right, Amy Goulet, or Gouillet?
Hi, good evening. Just a couple quick things. As she just mentioned, it's a confused process. This has been rushed through, and I'm sorry, but I would challenge you to prove to us where these signs have been posted on the freeways. Where's the mailers? We've not seen any of this. If you've given it to somebody else, it's not in my neighborhood. There's poor science. The science has not been peer-reviewed. It's been shown to be based on other information that has nothing to do with Pacifica. We are a unique community of different demographics, topography, and geography, and that is not being taken into consideration. And the unwillingness of the staff to extend the time and the process to allow us to chance to look at it, to digest the information, and come up with really clear questions and understanding is concerning, that you guys want to push this through and you're not sharing a lot of the information that we know is out there. So I would strongly ask you to please postpone this and give us the fair and due time that we deserve as citizens to figure out why you're rushing this so far, and give us all the information that is available out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Goulet.
Hello, thank you. Where to begin? So this LCP is flawed on so many levels. First and foremost, the LCP is supposed to be based on the best available science. The LCP itself defines best available science to mean the most recent peer-reviewed science reasonably validated by qualified experts in the scientific community. When I commented on this on the October 8th deadline, which I made, but the California Coastal Commission got to put their comments in 11 days later, I said that this hasn't been peer reviewed and that the city should get funds so that they can do peer review properly so we can use the best available science. The reply to my comment was, a peer review of information prepared by ESA and their consultants is outside of the scope and budget approved by this effort for the City Council. That is not right. The LCP hazard zones shall mean the areas shown on the city maps prepared by the Pacifica SLR Vulnerability Assessment incorporated herein. There are no maps incorporated herein. I've looked for the maps. There are no hazard maps. No one can tell me if this affects my property or not. If I've been to the city, I've asked them which policies apply, no one can tell me. As I said, the comments were due October 8th, but the Coastal Commission didn't get their comments in until October 19th. These were permitted late. The public is being asked to provide comments right now for a final draft that we haven't even seen. All we see are the comments and the responses to the comments. The Coastal Commission comments replace the term new development with redevelopment. This is huge. Redevelopment, as it applies right now, according to their definition, is an aggregate of all the remodeling that has been done since January 1st, 1977. If you add all that up, if it improves more than 50% of the property, which means putting a new roof on, adding a floor, painting your house, it is now considered redeveloped, and these policies apply. You've told us that the LCP doesn't include managed retreat, but it can be added literally the day after it's adopted by the City Council without public comment. We're not stupid, okay? This is disingenuous, and we can tell where it's going. I asked the Planning Commission to quit ramming this through at a breakneck pace for a lame duck City Council to approve. Stop and get the real best available science, respect the process, and do it correctly. Thank you.
Next up, Dan Nicholas, followed by Tim Blanchard.
Today, the waters are rising. Let us help you manage your retreat. The hills are dry. Let us help you manage your retreat. Rain and mudslides are coming. Let us help you manage your retreat. Earthquakes are coming. Let us help you manage your retreat. Mayor Keener. I'm sorry, is Mayor Keener here? No. Where in this process have we been included? Pacifica is a coastal community for whom you were hired and elected to protect. This is not protection. We've been led to believe that Pacificans support the retreat of homes west of Highway 1. However, the majority has heard the Surfrider Foundation, the Coastal Commission, ESA, and the voting majority has told you that dividing our community and emptying our community will not be tolerated. This is not an east-west issue. This is a shot across the bow to all Pacificans, east and west, that you and your homes are simply not welcome. That pristine land and coasts devoid of homes and communities are the goal. Do you believe this stops at a highway, Highway 1? What you have left is exactly what the Surfrider, the Coastal Commission, and the other special interests fight for: empty space to be used as a public playground and chosen businesses that support that playground. You don't believe me? You're building a hotel in the same managed retreat you expect us to accept. Hear this. We live here. We live here. You've heard the voice of the majority of voting people in Pacifica, and yet here we are, still, telling you again what we want. You invited ESA into our town, and it does not take a lot of digging to understand that they're the paid voice of Coastal Retreat. The December 10th vote that's coming up is a lame duck vote and should be stopped. Pacifica homeowners and our community, stop supporting and paying for and welcoming the Trojan horse of your own retreat. These policies don't bring balanced communities. They work towards no communities at all. Thank you.
Tim Blanchard, followed by Dennis Moralda.
Good evening. So I want to refer back to the supposed notices that we're supposed to get about these meetings. The first I seen was from Sam Carr, and you guys were well into a year into the process. Never seen nothing. None of my neighbors that are here from Fairway Park will attest to having ever seen anything from the Planning Commission or the City Council. That's a fact. You know, this has got a poor job of explaining the impacts on sea level rise and managed retreat to the residents west of Highway 1. Your science lacks peer review, that's been stated already. I understand the mayor had worked with ESA before. I'm questioning whether there was a potential bias there. You're making decisions that affect people 80 years in the future. I don't understand why it's not a 10-year or 20-year plan. If you really believe in this false science, why are you going to spend $80 million to put a seawall up out here and tear this down and put a hotel in? Really, I'm curious. I'd like to know why. I also feel that this is a bad decision to have this lame duck mayor and city council make this decision on the sea level rise plan, especially when they're not going to be accountable if there's a lawsuit forthcoming. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Dennis Meralda, followed by Janine Manna.
Yeah, Dennis Meralda, resident of Fairway Park, Pacifica for 40 years. The Planning Commission original, who approved the housing and the other developments along the coastal line, committed this Planning Commission, the City Council of Pacifica, and Pacifica itself to supporting those residents as it was originally planned. To try and take anything that would take that away, such as a last-minute effort to do managed retreat after the council would approve it, does not make any sense and is a non-committal. If you guys want to turn around and have a commitment from a hotel to come in, what are they going to look at? You just buried everybody who was built here in the early 50s, early 60s. You guys have been committed to support those properties. Don't give this to a lame duck city council. Thank you.
Thank you. Janine Manna, followed by Mark Steckbart.
Good evening, Commissioners. Janine Manna, North Central Coast District Manager with the California Coastal Commission. First off, we want to commend the city for tackling these difficult sea level rise issues and for starting to identify practical measures to address such issues moving forward. We also really appreciate the willingness of your staff to work with us to date. It is our common goal to maintain a resilient coastal community in Pacifica and protect our state's valuable coastal resources for current and future generations. We believe that the proposed policies include important planning provisions and provide a good foundation for the LCP update. However, there are still many details which require refinement to ensure that the proposed policies are comprehensive, feasible, and consistent with the Coastal Act. For example, the current policies do not adequately address redevelopment of properties in coastal hazard areas inward of the shoreline and leave a lot of future adaptation considerations to a time that's uncertain. Other such details that we feel need better refinement have been outlined in our October 19th letter to the city. We do recognize that addressing new and existing development in Pacifica is a complex challenge given the scope of current and future hazards combined with existing patterns of development and shoreline armoring and uncertainties about future sea level rise. As we have conveyed to city staff, there are policy approaches that would allow for continued reliance on armoring for certain development over a specified time horizon as identified in the city's current sub-area policies. However, such policy approaches still need to ensure that the impacts to other coastal resources, like public access for all Californians, would be mitigated. And it needs to build in an understanding that other adaptation options may be necessary if and when armoring or beach nourishment can no longer provide adequate protection for both development and coastal resources. As such, we would greatly prefer to have more staff-to-staff working sessions to better address these policy approaches and refinements prior to adoption of such policies. Thank you for your time, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Mark Steckbart.
Thank you. The aforementioned bureaucratic talk from Coastal Commission is example one on why you all should vote this down tonight, and let's do it right over the next 6 months. Because what she was talking about affects voters, houses, and businesses. So tonight we're all on a fool's errand. This isn't even a real meeting. You're not even going to take a vote unless you really force the issue. You're here for sort of meet and confer. You've got 900 pages to read. at a page a minute, that's a 15-hour meeting. So we know that's not going to happen. There wasn't even formal mail notice. Planning Commission does mail within 500 feet for normal projects. Nobody on the west side of the coast got Highway 1 got a notice in the mail of this meeting, or even for December 10th. We did get a meeting notice in April, if the camera wants to pull in on this. It was taken at like 50,000 feet. You can't tell a single affected address here if your life depended on it. And that was the sole city mail notice to people in this town. People in the building got it, but the owners, if they didn't live in the building, did not get it. So the meeting notice is bogus. Managed retreat is in full force. The underlying reference documents for 800 pages fully mention managed retreat. They have not been scrubbed. The effects of managed retreat are present throughout the report. Houses on stilts means managed retreat. When staff says no seawalls for new development, whatever that means managed retreat, because the water will come. So let's define applicability of west of Highway 1 development or redevelopment. Does that include remodel, and under what conditions? The voters in this town expect a straight answer from you guys, and certainly eventually council, because the new council will do it. Another reason to delay December 10th. The voters should know remodel of their house west of Highway 1 is affected. Cost to relocate infrastructure. We have all this discussion about technical work group. Water, sewer, internet connection, whatever else is in the ground has not been priced out, and nobody knows what it's going to cost. I live at 700 feet. I'm not going to get wet, but I will pay eventually to move the sewer that I use. Nobody's told me if that's $40,000, $50,000, or $60,000. Moody's bond rating will downgrade the bonds in this town if we do not protect property values. That will tank school bonds. City revenue will decrease. 50% of the city taxes is property tax. Essential city services will deteriorate. The decisions of the LCP are supported by flawed findings and assumptions. The findings are not supported by the evidence. The scenarios in tonight's documentation are very glowing. They put no cost on what the expectation is. There will be a policy, and it's going to cost homeowners a fortune, and they will not tell us what the numbers are. Okay, thank you.
And the last card I've got tonight is Richard Harris. Oh, looks like there's more. Followed by Spencer Potter.
Good evening, Commissioners. I have late couple of exhibits to my...
Yeah, if you could hand it to staff, they'll bring it on up to us. Thank you.
I've written several letters basically setting out that there is a systematic undervaluing of the assets behind the beach, on the landward side of the beach, and an attempt to systematically overvalue the beach using a non-economic valuation method that is that we were originally told came from the Coastal Commission. Turned out that it didn't come from the Coastal Commission. It was received by the Coastal Commission, and it was not approved by the Coastal Commission. And in that Coastal Commission report, it said, this is not objective because there is an attempt to apply so-called statewide beach values to the Pacifica beaches, which have a personality that is different than the wide playa of Southern California that attract famous tourists. We go into quite a bit of detail about that. Pacifica does not know on its beaches how many people use the beaches. The only beach that Pacifica has information on is Pacifica State Beach. All the rest are guesses, supported by no data. And I've gone into that in quite a bit of detail in my letters. I've given you, in that situation where you have no data to support it does not meet the standard, which is substantial evidence. There is no evidence. There is a case in Pacifica, a 2014 case in Pacifica, that rejected the use of this non-economic valuation because it did not have the local data. And I've given you the citation, I've given you excerpts from it. The discussion is at pages 42 to 44. And that discussion was adopted by the commission when it adopted the staff report. I could go on and on. I've gone into great detail in my letters. I ask you to read those letters. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Spencer Potter, followed by Kathy Maresco. And that's my last card.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Spencer Potter, and I'm with the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department has serious concerns with the draft LCP policies insofar as they incorporate and implement Pacifica's sea level rise adaptation plan, and specifically hazard policy number 4. During the course of the local coastal planning process, Rec and Park has provided the City of Pacifica with our concerns on elements of the sea level rise adaptation plan's economic analysis. This analysis does not give any value to the wetlands that are at the Sharp Park property, or any wetlands at all, or the endangered species that are at the Sharp Park property, and also undervalues non-beach recreational property as compared with other types of assets, such as beach recreational areas and residential property and commercial property. This decision and assumption leads to the flawed conclusion that a management tree adaptation alternative at the Sharp Park subarea is the least expensive option, because wetlands and public recreation land are very cheaply valued under the model's assumptions. These deficiencies render the sea level rise adaptation plan's economic analysis is pretty unreliable, and therefore we do not support this analysis being implemented as part of the Pacifica's draft policies. Thank you.
Kathy Maresco. If anyone else wishes to speak, now's the time to fill out a card. This is my last one.
Hi, I'm Kathy Maresco, and I just wanted to caution you again about making a decision before you have all the answers. At each of the meetings I've been to, the public has asked the same questions over and over, and they haven't been answered. They want to know if their homes are going to be protected. If they come to you for a permit to add a new roof, add a room, do something to their property, under this local coastal plan, will that be approved? That hasn't been answered, and that is the most important question that people have. Will they be able to maintain and improve their homes going forward, or will they be stopped from doing that? And again, it's a simple question, and through all of this information, it hasn't been answered. So that's just what I would want you to do, is please make sure these questions are answered before final approval is made on this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Jeanette. Thank you.
I reviewed the draft plan, and what I didn't notice any of were any sort of definitions. And I think that's what a lot of us have come here with questions about. Nothing's defined. Where are the limits of the sub-areas? Where are the limits of what shoreline? What I heard for the second scenario was that the proposal for any redevelopment or new development, however that's defined, it's not, or a cross-reference to some sort of statute or regulation where those are defined, is that it would be the homeowners or the property owner's requirement to prove that sea level rise wouldn't affect the development for the next 100 years, which, as we've already pointed out, there's a lack of peer-reviewed study. So how would one even do that it would create some sort of really vague and haphazard planning if you're trying to say, as a matter of fact, I have to prove that this is going to be okay for the next 100 years. I also had a concern with the hazard plan that requires indemnifying the city for redevelopment. Regarding what? A lot of these policies are very vague. They don't specify what exactly they're based on. And I'm also really concerned about the lack of graphs and maps and lack of basically referencing what the attachments are, what page they're on, what document they're in. It's very difficult for us as lay people to say what our opinions are on these things when they don't say. They just use vague references that cause a lot of distress for us. So please don't support this plan and send it back to the drawing board. Thank you, I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have any more cards. I want to give everyone an opportunity here to speak who wants to speak, but I don't have any more, so I'm going to close, going once, going twice. Okay. Point of order, we're not approving this plan tonight, right? This is for us to ask questions and get public comment.
Yes, that's correct. Just to re-summarize the process from here is the commission's being asked to provide comments on these the policies, and then the policies are currently scheduled to go to City Council for their direction on December 10th. And then they will be incorporated into we're calling the 2019 draft of the LCP, as well as the general plan, or along with the general plan, and that will be brought back at a later time in next year to the commission for formal action and recommendation to the City Council.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm going to open up for questions for staff. I'm going to start off with one since I don't see any lights. I beat you to it. I want to get to probably what I've heard is one of the more important questions, if not the most important question that I'm getting from public comment, written and orally tonight, which is, let's say you're a homeowner west of Highway 1, you want to paint your house. I'm going to start with this one. Or you want to remodel your home. Either one. And you're in this hazard zone. What do you have to do?
So there would be nothing different for the vast majority of folks who live in what would be demarcated as a potential hazard area. The ones who would need to produce studies if they were expanding their home, it would be shoreline development, so immediately adjacent to the shoreline, and therefore potentially immediately there's immediate potential to be damaged in a storm event.
So immediately adjacent to the shoreline, meaning kind of what you're saying, like right there on the shoreline, or is it like a block away, or are we talking?
On the shoreline.
Okay. And,
I would just say that if the chair needs to recess for a little bit so that order is restored to the chamber, that might be appropriate for the chair to consider.
Well, thank you. I don't think we're there yet. I appreciate it. But yeah, I hope everyone can help me along and so we can get the questions answered, because I have a lot of questions myself. I think everyone else does. I see a lot of lights and we'd like to get them answered. So, well, thank you for that. And I'm gonna have some follow-up questions later, but I'm going to give my fellow commissioners a chance here. So, Commissioner Nevlin?
I guess I'll just start with one in particular, just to make sure I'm clear on it. And this is, we had a comment or two that dealt with sort of valuation methodology and I guess the role of mitigation, et cetera, and some concerns about sort of the reliability, I guess, of some of the economic analysis that was done. And I kind of really wanted to understand what the role of the economic analysis was. And there was some, in particular, as it pertained to sort of the value of, the attempts to value kind of beach use, and whether it's at a daily rate or some other way, and whether or not those figures would have any relevance at all to mitigation and the value or the cost of mitigation, the extent mitigation was required going forward under the LCP policies that we're talking about.
So I think I heard your question as the role to the cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, and I guess, again, to state it again, there was actually some concern about sort of the value that was used, or the articulated value that was used for beach access. And I can't remember if it was $40 a day or whatever it was. I read it somewhere in these materials. Where that figure came from, whether it's really an appropriate figure for purposes of our community. And then past that, what were those figures used for in any event? And are they used in particular with respect to mitigation going forward?
Okay. So the evaluation, the purpose of the evaluation is to provide a apples-to-apples comparison of the adaptation strategies, what the cost of one adaptation strategy will be compared to another. So in the adaptation plan, our economic expert, Dr. Phil King, used a beach value of $40 a day. He was confident in that value based on some studies that he has seen and referenced, and provided an analysis on that number. We did receive comments on the draft adaptation plan that people were concerned that that value was too high, concerned that that value was more representative of maybe beaches in Southern California and maybe not representative of Pacifica beaches and or all Pacifica beaches. Dr. Phil has responded to those comments, stating that he believes that $40 a day continues to be an appropriate value, but also has supplemented that analysis with an evaluation of $10 a day, just to do a sensitivity analysis to see how the impacts would be changed if we significantly lowered that value. He came to find that that doesn't change the results, doesn't really significantly change the results in the placement of the cost-benefit analysis. I think there was one exception for the Rockaway area, but it just provided further support that protection was going to be the preferred method. So I don't know if Bob has any further thoughts to add.
Sure. Hi, Bob Battaglio. I'm an engineer with Environmental Science Associates. Not an economist, but the economics analysis was done by our team, by a subcontractor, Dr. King. So what Bonnie said is correct. From my understanding, I would want to also mention that we did not consider the value of the beach ecology. That was not considered in dollars or any other way. And we did not consider the value of wetlands ecology either. There was a comment about that. So it's very difficult to estimate the dollar value of a wetland or a beach. I think wetlands, we have more information. Beaches are difficult to estimate. So I just thought that would be important, because there are people, certainly in the environmental community, that do value beaches and wetlands. And that was not part of the benefit cost analysis. The other comment I would like to make is that the analysis that Dr. King used is consistent with what the Army Corps of Engineers does in terms of assigning a value to beach recreation, so that when they do a benefit cost analysis for beach nourishment projects that are federally subsidized, they can consider the recreational value of those beaches in addition to the storm damage reduction benefits. So I think it is in Pacifica's interest to have some idea as to the benefit, the value to visitors and people that recreate on the beaches,
in case the city wishes to pursue federal funding for beach nourishment, which is something that's done in other parts of the country and in the San Diego area in particular.
Thank you. And I guess the second, to the extent there's a second part of my question, I just wanted to make sure I was clear on sort of the scope of the use of the economic analysis. Again, I don't know if it was stated, but there might be some concern that this is kind of going to be a proxy for, or the analysis that would be used for purposes of, setting values for purposes of mitigation that might be required in the future. And you had made reference to being sort of used for sort of an apples-to-apples comparison of various, potential strategies that are described in the policies. But is that kind of the extent of its use, or is there something else that we should be aware of?
Yeah, that's staff's intention for the use of that number. We're not foreseeing the use of that number for anything in the future at this time. I think there may be some concern that number may be used for mitigation value, but we have a policy to create a separate program that will identify what the appropriate proportional mitigation would be for those impacts.
I think that's a helpful record for us to make.
Commissioner Clifford.
I wanted to, there have been a lot of questions or comments directed towards postponing the December 10th City Council meeting. One, we can't do that. But I wanted to understand the driver behind why it's December 10th. And in looking at my report here on packet page 142, the grant agreement requires that the city LCP be sent to the Coastal Commission for certification by December 31st, 2018. Is that correct? And that is, in fact, one of the drivers for having the meeting with the City Council before that date?
So the deadline that you identified on packet page 142 can and has been extended, and so that's when the actual adopted LCP, city-adopted LCP would need to be forwarded to the commission. Okay. And so, given the large amount of work and length of time it will take to reintroduce the general plan and the LCP to the community, we're hopeful to get our direction on these adaptation policies this year so that we can go ahead and continue with that work in 2019. Also, I'll just say I know that meetings can change, but we have identified that date and put that out at public meetings also already in the past.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Commissioner Stigging.
As a disclosure, I discussed the genesis of this project with Richard Harris of the San Francisco Polo Golf Alliance on May 20th for a period of less than 7 minutes. I'm curious if Mr. Potter is here as the legal representative of San Francisco Parks and Recs Department.
No, I represent the Natural Resources Division of the San Francisco Recreation Park Department, not the City Attorney's Office.
This will probably have to go to Chair. I'm curious if that is his position, if we'd consider granting Mr. Potter another 3 minutes to specifically discuss Hazard Policy 4.
Council.
It is within the chair's discretion to reopen public comment.
Okay.
This would not be that.
If I'm reopening public comment, am I reopening public comment for everybody, or can I do it for,
And
limited?
to be clear, I'm not specifically asking to reopen public comment. I'm specifically asking to ask some questions of Mr. Potter, if that's possible.
Is that possible?
He wasn't part of staff's presentation. He was just making comments as part of the public. So my recommendation would be to reopen public comment to allow the commissioner to ask specific questions of this individual if he's willing to answer them.
I'm going to withdraw that. Looking at the city attorney's description, I misunderstood what his position was. If he's a member of the public versus representing City of San Francisco, then I'm going to withdraw that.
I think he indicated he was here on behalf of the City and County of San Francisco, in particular Natural Resources division, unless I misunderstood.
That's correct, sir, yes. I just don't represent the city attorney's office, but I...
Right, that was the question I heard you give. So, do you, I think, if you wish to speak for 3 minutes, do we have to take a vote to reopen the public?
No.
All right,
Thank you.
just build the record. Go ahead, you have 3 minutes. If you want to speak.
Yeah, I just
You're being drafted.
specifically wanted to hear a little bit more on hazard policy number 4 that you spoke about.
Well, my comment pertained to the fact that hazard policy 4 says it incorporates the adaptation plan, which we took we had identified some serious problems with the adaptation plan in the course of our analysis. Specifically, we were concerned that wetlands mitigation was not considered as part of the economic analysis. And this has been done before, and we received comments both orally and written on the plan back in response to our comments that this was not done in the plan more or less because it was difficult. It has been done before, though, and there is a way to value wetlands. It's been done many times in the past. The Army Corps of Engineers actually has recommended guidance for how to value wetlands, and I think that was not done in the course of the project because it was considered outside the scope at one point or another. But however, I do know that in the RFP for the trying to get a consultant for this project, they talked about how ecological assets were supposed to be valued as part of the adaptation, the economic analysis, and it just wasn't in terms of the wetlands habitat and endangered species habitat. The additional problem that we have with the plan is that the adaptation plan undervalues non-beach recreational property. It valued it in terms of use rather than in terms of the actual cost or value according to some sort of, they use Zillow, it seems like, to value residential assets. But when you look at the Sharp Park Golf Course, just looked at by the subsidized fees that we get from the users of the golf course. And we don't think that's a fair apples-to-apples comparison. We think that assumption devalues the recreational assets at Sharp Park. And that's not just a golf course, that's also the coastal trail that provides a recreational route along the ocean and other non-beach recreational value that the Sharp Park property brings to Pacifica. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks, appreciate that. All right, I'm going to close the public comment period again. Okay, Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. First, on behalf of the Commission, I want to thank everybody for coming here and coming up and speaking. It's really helpful to hear what everyone has to say, and rest assured we all heard all of your comments and are taking it into account as we deliberate up here. So I heard a couple themes from the public comment, and what I'll try to do is ask you guys the question directly and give you a chance to answer, and I don't care if it's whoever you think is most appropriate to answer. I'm very open for it. But so I had a couple questions. The first one is kind of a follow-on of what Chair Campbell asked about, let's say I'm a homeowner in the hazard zone west of Highway 1, and I want to remodel my house, and I'm not sure how detailed I want to get, but just remodel it. And I think you gave us some, you responded, and then the question is where would you direct us in the materials that would specify exactly, well, okay, because I know you said, well, only if there's a limiting effect only on structures that are adjacent to the shoreline, right? Where would that be, and is that a hazard policy, or is that anywhere in here that we could find? Because is there any more specificity for people to find out, well,
In terms of a definition of shoreline?
no, in terms of how my desire to remodel my house would be affected with these documents.
So These policies are intended to to implement the council's stated desire to protect neighborhoods. So I think that many people are reacting to some language that was in a Coastal Commission guidance document. And I think maybe assuming or interpreting that those types of policies would be in the city's document.
Which type of policies?
So policies or recommended adaptation measures that could include limitations on redevelopment, or if you do so much remodeling that then the home is considered new development and therefore not entitled to shoreline protection. And that is not the city's, we don't feel that those are good policies for our city, and so therefore they're not in our document.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so another question that's related is, I heard there was a lot of concern around the city's potential adoption of managed retreat as a policy.
Right, we are not adopting managed retreat. There are no managed retreat policies.
Okay. I think this is just helpful because there's a lot of, sometimes you hear somebody come up and say, such and such is, they say, well, I don't want managed retreat, and then all of a sudden, managed retreat becomes a fact that we're pushing, and it's not the case. That's not the case at all. Let's see. Another theme I heard also was there was a desire to postpone this process so that the newly seated council can have a chance to weigh in. And first of all, I think we made clear that we don't have the jurisdiction to, it's outside the scope of our authority to stop this right now. We're just, we're contributing comments for the record, but there's no yes or no vote that's going to be at the end of this meeting, just to be clear. But so my question is, to what extent will, because I realize that there's different stages have different deliberations by different bodies in this process. And I know that will there be an opportunity for the newly seated council to weigh in on this process?
Sure. So in 2019, when the adoption of the documents are anticipated to come forward, they would of course be with the newly seated council. Okay.
So for example, if there's somebody who voted for a candidate who ended up winning this recent election, that candidate is going to have a chance, an opportunity to eventually weigh in on the merits of this process. Yes. Okay, great. Okay, I think I've dominated it long enough. Thanks.
I just had a follow-up question to Commissioner Clifford. The timeline, the December 31st timeline, is that the Coastal Commission? Is that a state deadline, or is that what? Could you explain that deadline again?
Sure, that was the initial deadline written into the grant, but we have additional time after that, and so I believe we've already.
We can't have people back and forth like that.
We have until the end of 2019.
You have until 2019. Thank you very much.
I think I'd like to clarify, we have until the end of 2019 to do what? I mean, I think there's a fair amount of work that needs to get done. Again, if we could just sort of catalog that.
Right, so we have until the end of 2019 to present the entire LCP, as adopted by the city. And so as was explained in the presentation, the LCP isn't just adaptation policies, it's, several other chapters, and that's what we're going to be reintroducing the entire document to the community in 2019.
Right, so if I understand it correctly, you've got a local coastal plan and policy it's a big multi-volume document, multi-chapter document. We're considering tonight one chapter of it, but the entire book, I guess, is going to be looked at by the new city council in 2019.
Correct.
And they're going to have an opportunity to look at everything in 2019.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Commissioner Nevlin.
Great. And just to dovetail on that, if the new city council or new members of the city council, the new city council is comprised, wants to revisit the sea level rise LCP policies, it'll be within their discretion to do that?
Yes, it would be.
Okay. And I just, again, I wanted to, there was sort of just among the sort of big themes that we've been dealing with this evening, one was just sort of this notion that managed retreat is kind of embedded in some of the documents that kind of led up to the policies, notwithstanding that managed retreat is not one of the policies that's reflected in the LCP policies that we're talking about this evening. And I wanted to, in particular, reference some language on page 9, because I think that there might be something that staff could maybe share that would maybe elucidate kind of what we're talking about. I mean, managed retreat is not included in any of the near-term policies. That's language that's specifically included in page 9. It's page 800 of the packet. I can't say I read every single page, but I got that far back. And it also says that managed retreat would be reconsidered in the mid to long term if feasibility and monitoring warranted, as detailed in hazard policies 5 and 6. And there was something said this evening that had me concerned. I wanted to make sure that I understood it. I think one of the members of the public had expressed some concern that after these policies are adopted, they could be essentially changed without a public hearing or maybe without some form of a process. And I wanted to know from staff's perspective what the process would be if we got to a place in the medium to longer term where we had to revisit and maybe think about options that we hadn't incorporated into this set of policies at this point.
Sure. So once the policies as incorporated into a 2019 LCP are adopted and certified, then they cannot be changed without another public process. So there would be public noticing. It's a legislative document, requires Planning Commission consideration and recommendation and City Council action.
Okay, so it wouldn't be the case then that as staff or as staff, let's just say, we would bake something new into it like managed retreat without a robust process like the one we've been engaged in?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Stegging.
My question is a little complex there. At several other planning meetings around California, I've observed them approving waivers for FEMA or SBA disaster mitigation loans to the homeowner, the low costs, no interest loans for $200,000 and $250,000. I'm curious if any of these restrictions on expansion or redevelopment, specifically those not entitled to shoreline protections, would affect their ability to get like a hazard mitigation loan from FEMA.
So are you speaking to Coastal Commission actions, the waivers?
Specifically this LCP, could it affect homeowners' abilities to get basically you apply for the FEMA SBA loan of $200,000. It's low cost, low interest or no interest depending on your situation. And the last step before you get your check is it's got to be approved by local planning. And I'm curious if there's situations where homeowners here who might currently be entitled to shoreline protection and might be using those FEMA loans, if they would not be entitled to shoreline protection and approval to get those FEMA loans after this was complete?
No. If they're entitled to shoreline protection, these policies would bolster their ability to continue to get shoreline protection.
Thank you.
Commissioner Clifford.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Policy 9, the transfer of development. I wanted to find out how that's, if that works only for undeveloped properties, or if somebody owns a home that's threatened and they choose to, they have another lot somewhere in the city, can they transfer the development to, that's existing to that lot?
So just to be clear, we are speaking of the development rights, not necessarily a physical home. So that could be a separate process to move your home to a different lot that you may own in town, and able to be done with a building permit.
Okay.
The transfer of development rights is more of the right to potential entitlement. I know the commission is familiar with it. We recently did a transfer of development rights project. And although it wasn't envisioned, I think when the current ordinance was drafted, I think that after these policies are adopted, if they are adopted, we should look at applying it to parcels that may currently have development that are looking to move, so that they can get additional value out of their property.
And I had another question around the transfer of development rights. In terms of, I was thinking in terms of either the quarry or the Carlson property, where the quarry especially has a kink in it in terms of if they wanted to do residential there, they would have to go for a vote of the people. But if they also purchased another piece of land and then wanted to transfer the development rights from the quarry to that other piece of land, could they transfer residential without a vote?
So that's a really interesting question, and one that I think we would need to address when we got into the actual implementation of this policy for how to address the quarry specifically.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have a follow-up question to my earlier question. Just keep building on it. If you're a homeowner, you're directly adjacent to the shoreline, you want to remodel. Right now I'm thinking of instances where we've had commercial property owners on the west side of Palmetto and in northern Palmetto, where they come in, they want to put something along the shoreline, and we make them do a geotechnical report and make sure it's not going to all fall into the ocean. And that's just what we do today. And that's what we've done for years. So I imagine if a homeowner comes in and wants to do a remodel and they're directly on the shoreline, and it involves more than painting the house, let's say they want to, do something significant, what do you envision they have to do other than the general geotech analysis that they have to do today as a result of implementing this plan?
So if they would have to analyze the safety if they currently have some sort of shoreline armoring, how well it's been maintained and how it's operating, and how many more years it's expected to continue its protection of that shoreline. If they're on a shoreline that doesn't have any armoring, which I don't know that there are too many of them in town, then they would be looking at an analysis of the expected erosion rates, and to make sure for the estimated, certain lifespan of the home, that it would remain safe. And part of the policies is direction to create a clear guidance on what exactly we'll be requesting of homeowners or property owners in general, so that they have a clear understanding of what studies are needed. Currently, we've had some shoreline development. It was more on a commercial nature, not a small, single-family homeowner. And there was a lot of back and forth and probably frustration on their part because, quite frankly, the Coastal Commission keeps asking them for more and more and more studies. And so I think this is hopeful that we would get more surety in our process. through implementation of these policies.
Thank you. Let's see. Yeah.
A comment on Policy 3, hazard identification and mapping. States, clarifies the city must prepare and update maps to identify projected hazardous areas. So I have a question about where those maps are located for the public to view. Does the public have access to those maps, and where may they find them?
The maps are available in the vulnerability assessment. They're in your binders now. They're the pages that are folded over. They show what assets are anticipated to be vulnerable.
Does the public have access to these maps?
Yes, the maps are in Appendix B through D, I believe, of the vulnerability assessment. The public does have access to them. Not only are they included in this staff report as an attachment, they're posted and have been posted on the Sea Level Rise webpage. Additionally, there is a GIS WebView mapper that someone can use. It's instead of reviewing a static map, they can use a live GIS web mapper to identify their specific property, search for it by their address, and use different layers to identify if and what projection sea level rise their property may be affected at.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Kraske. Commissioner Nebelin.
Yeah, actually, just a couple of additional questions again with respect to, the first one is with respect to hazard policy number 4, and this is the sea level rise adaptation plan, and actually sets forth some additional findings that'll be required, it looks like, going forward when, at the point where these policies are adopted with respect to development in sub-areas. And there's a reference in, I guess I'd call it subsection A. It's the sort of the first finding that's articulated there, and that's that the proposed development is sited and designed to minimize coastal hazards and impacts to coastal resources to the extent feasible, consistent with the adaptation plan. And I think one of the places where we might be getting a little concerned, I know it certainly caught my eye, is that, at least if I'm recalling, and I know there are a lot of different documents, so maybe I'm mistaken, but the adaptation plan does actually analyze managed retreat. It's not something that, it's certainly not articulated in any of the policies, so I want to be real clear on that. But I just want to be clear, for the record, that the reference here to adaptation plan is not a reference to the notion of managed retreat unless and until that was something that was analyzed and actually incorporated into our LCP. Is that fair statement, or is there something different we should extrapolate from the reference to the adaptation plan here?
Yeah, I'm actually going to let Charles maybe take a first swing at that.
Good evening, Charles Lester. My interpretation of the language in Hazard Policy 4, right in the first sentence there, is that the adaptation plan, the city shall implement the adaptation plan as expressed in the policies of the LCP. So it specifically is acknowledging that the policies that you may adopt are the manifestation of the adaptation plan.
That makes some sense to me. I'm wondering if, I mean, that just actually sounds like very elegant language. It would be probably comforting to a lot of people if we were to add language that sort of, that would be a comment that I would like to offer to the City Council. That seems like language that would be helpful to clarify what the intent is there. Might put some folks' minds a little more at ease with respect to some of this. And I had one other question, as long as I've got the mic. There was a commenter who had made some, who'd expressed some concerns about what I think is Hazard Policy 46, and this is the assumption of risk, and has language with respect to indemnity in it as well. And I know it's still early days, but I think the holding of harmless is a pretty clear concept, and I think I got that. But sort of what we think we might have in mind as staff going forward with respect to the scope of indemnity. Is this something we already have? Is this something that's new? And if so, what would the scope of indemnity perhaps look like?
We do have standard indemnification language, but I'm going to look to our counsel.
Okay, thank you.
So in my experience, yes, it is something that's fairly standard and would be incorporated in the actual wording of the deed restriction.
Would it be holding the city harmless for any, any claims that might be made against the city with respect to any harms that might flow to adjacent properties, for example, in connection with development that is covered by a deed restriction like that? I'm kind of indemnity nerd since I deal with this in my own work.
Yeah, they would be a broad form indemnity provision. So protecting the city from any sort of claims or liabilities that might arise from the development.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Gordon.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Follow-on question to Commissioner Neblin. Just one more time, when you said your understanding of that language in Hazard Policy 4 sub A consistent with the adaptation plan, you were saying that the purpose of that language is simply to say as expressed in the hazard policies, or in the, can you say what you said again? I just missed it, I just missed it.
Yes, I was referring to the preamble of the policy up right at the top, where it says that the city shall implement the sea level rise adaptation plan as expressed in the LCP's general and sub-area coastal hazard adaptation policies. So, as has been pointed out, there aren't any specific policies addressing managed retreat, for example, in the proposed policies, even though that concept, as was also noted, is well discussed in the adaptation plan. So the decision was made to draft these policies with attention to some of the shoreline protection policies, the beach replenishment policies that were discussed in the adaptation plan also, and embody those here in this document, proposed document, but not managed retreat. So that aspect of the adaptation plan is not expressed in these policies.
So if I could follow up, so that's why Hazard Policy 8, that's the managed retreat hazard policy. That's just in the draft, is no longer in the current plan.
Policy 8.
Yeah, it was the old
Prior policy.
in the prior draft policy. That's gone now, even though it was considered in the assessment.
Yeah, there were numerous references.
It didn't
to
make it
managed
into our
retreat
policy.
that are not in this document.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. Thank you. Sorry to cut you off, Commissioner.
No. We're all trying to get clarity here. Another, I was struck by Commissioner Neblin's conversation with the planning director. A member of the public had expressed concern that, well, after the LCP is adopted, then what's to keep somebody in the process from simply reinserting managed retreat? And I think the member of the public, I can't remember, I'm vague now, but they stated it with certainty, so much certainty that I was like, oh, maybe that could happen. And then I'm really glad Commissioner Neblin brought it up and asked you, and you said, well, no, that cannot happen. And I'm wondering if, and what struck me is that if Commissioner Neblin hadn't asked you that question, you had not had an opportunity to clarify for the record that no, that's not a potential scenario that could happen, that many of us would have walked away thinking, oh, that's a possibility. And I'm wondering if there's anything else that was stated in the public comment period that you were like, no, that's not right. Because I see partly this, this is an opportunity for us all to get better educated about this process. And so if there's anything else that struck you as being worthy of commenting on, I think it would be really helpful for everybody to hear.
Okay.
Not to put you on the spot.
I'll start, and maybe I'll ask my colleagues if I don't capture something. Well, first of all, there were quite a few statements that were that managed retreat is in the plan, and it is not in the plan. That's, one of the reasons why the city's still moving forward with our Palmetto downtown specific plan, hopefully redeveloping this site. It's because we're not planning to retreat from this area. Let's see, the plans, as Associate Planner O'Connor mentioned, in response to another question, all of the plans and documents are readily available on the website for the public to view, including all of the maps and other associated documents. What am I missing? So the notice, we did send out a postcard to the entire community, both property owners and renters. There were the electronic reader board sign on the freeway. It's usually posted closer to Crespi, I think.
To clarify on that reference, that the road sign was only used to advertise one meeting. It wasn't for all of them, so just clarify on that point. But it was available for motorists to view. I believe it was for the first adaptation plan public meeting.
And I'd like to point out that when a body, either the Planning Commission or the City Council, is considering items that are applicable to very large areas of town, so that the noticing directly in the mail would be difficult to do, the law does allow for 1/8 page advertising to suffice for the noticing, and so that is what we did for actually all of even our community meetings. So that comes to mind. What else?
Maybe, Bob, do you mind just mentioning the claims that we're not using best available science? We're using science that is recommended by the Coastal Commission?
And peer reviewed?
Sure. Yeah, so Bob Battaglio, ESA. We are following the policies of the Coastal Commission and their guidance and their LCP and CDP, a Coastal Development Permit document. The best available science refers to the sea level rise scenarios that we're using, which are state policy, and they use the term best available science. And there are a number of the reports that we relied on that are peer reviewed. That was a concern that several people have mentioned. I will say that our work has not been peer reviewed, the work for Pacifica. I'm not aware of the other cities that are in the same process having their work peer reviewed. We were selected in a competitive selection process, and I do think that we're practicing at the standard of practice. But we would be fine with a peer review if somebody wanted to do that. We've done that before, so. I don't know, was there anything else you wanted me to say on that? I would just say there was a number of people here from Fairway Park, West Fairway Park, and the plan, as I understand it, emphasizes allowing the city of San Francisco to continue to maintain the coastal levee, whatever you want to call it. And also there are elements in the plan that provide a small berm and 2 pump stations to maintain flood management for the neighborhood. So I'm a little puzzled by the references to managed retreat, especially for that neighborhood, which is pretty far back from the shore. I just wanted to clear that up as the engineer that's worked on the project.
Right, and to add on to that, I would say that the vast majority, except for very few lots that could be impacted by flooding, which we've tried to mitigate with the policies, West Fairway Park is not in a hazard zone, and so these policies would not impact them. And then the last thing I thought I would mention is the Coastal Commission comments, and that they came in later, and we still responded to them. It's because they they granted us the funds, and we're required to communicate with them throughout the process, and so therefore they're not quite the same as a typical responder, commenter.
And finally, thank you, Commissioners. Kevin Woodhouse, City Manager. I'll just reiterate, and Ms. O'Connor's presentation was very clear about the extensive outreach process and the months and months that this process has been ongoing, with many, many meetings and outreach to community members. During that process in the middle, we actually did extend the timeline of this project, and that's how you get to sort of a policy decision at this point in time, and then we move into next year with the rest of the LCP update. So it's been an extensive and long process.
City Manager, thank you. Question, so do you, my understanding is the public's going to have additional bites at the apple on this plan as it moves forward through 2019. And the City Council has the ability to open public comment or do whatever it wants as each chapter of the local coastal plan comes up before them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I think part of the goal of, taking this in stages is, as the commissioners know, there's a significant number of chapters and issues in the rest of the local coastal plan. So the goal is to, address the policies, the sea level rise adaptation policies now, and then next year be able to focus on all of those other issues, package it all together, and bring it back for the formal action by the commission, as well as the council.
Thank you. I had an additional question, maybe for Mr. Patalio. The hazard zones, so I think also referred to in the maps as the bluff dune erosion zone, so the line that a lot of folks are concerned about. What was how was that line drawn, and what was the data behind it?
The red line?
The red line.
The red line.
Yes.
That line was from the Pacific Institute study published around 2009, 2010. That, full disclosure, I did contribute to that. The erosion estimate was based on the historic erosion rate amplified through an equation by the rate of sea level rise. The concept being that as sea level rises, the wave run-up and waves will essentially impact the base of the bluff more frequently with greater intensity, and therefore the erosion rate would accelerate along with sea level rise. So it's an acceleration of the historic erosion rate. We use that information because the Cosmos, which is the coastal storm modeling system by the U.S. Geological Survey, did not adequately address coastal erosion in their 2.0, Our Coast, Our Future model outputs. They had some bluff erosion, but really not much mapped. So we couldn't use that consistently through the city. We did use the Cosmos 2.0 for all the flooding, the coastal flooding by waves, and we used FEMA maps with some other adjustments for the creek flooding. There will be new Cosmos maps coming out. They're just starting to come out, and so there will be a new estimate of coastal erosion by the U.S. Geological Survey available soon.
And will that be incorporated into?
It's not in our scope. It would be relatively easy for us to, or the city, to post that on the website. We have this web mapper viewer that we set up so that anybody can click on it without the geographic information system software, and you can look at all these maps online on the city's website. You can click on them, but the USGS will provide a similar viewer, but they also provide the data, so it would just be a simple matter of uploading that to, and it would be available that way. As far as I know, we haven't actually selected the erosion hazard maps, at least ESA hasn't, that would be used for the city's policies. The adaptation analysis we used was different than the red lines on the maps. The red lines on the maps were the Pacific Institute work, as I mentioned earlier. For the alternative analysis, we used another model, and the erosion limits predicted with that model are less than what was shown in the Pacific Institute. I don't know if I'm getting too far into the weeds, but there's another set. For each adaptation alternative, there's different erosion amounts. If you have a wall, there's less. If you have beach nourishment, there's less. If you have managed retreat, there's more. And so when we did that analysis, we had to use some additional mapping. I expect the Cosmos maps that will come out will probably be somewhere in between the Pacific Institute and the adaptation maps, are similar to what we've had used. I don't know if that.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that too much? Sorry.
No, no.
I'd be happy to answer further questions about that if you'd like.
No, I was just curious about the underlying data, so thank you very much.
Sure.
Commissioner Neblin.
Thanks. I just had one other clarifying question, and I wanted to thank the Coastal Commission for being here, and for everybody from the public to being here and sharing information. Something that was Coastal Commission related, and maybe the Coastal Commission is the right place to get the answer. I was a little unclear on a comment that sort of spoke to redevelopment versus new development, and then a reference back to sometime in the 1970s and some other, I guess it was more of a definitional maybe difference between the way maybe the city assesses what constitutes, I don't know, maybe improvement versus new development versus redevelopment. I just was hoping I could get a little clarity again on that, and I don't know if it has any specific relevance to the policies, but again, I was a little fuzzy on all that.
So the Coastal Commission guidance does provide some recommendations for how jurisdictions could address what constitutes new development. And so that would be writing into your policies or an implementation plan that certain definitions where that starting at when the Coastal Act was put into place, and then you would look at how much change has happened to the structure since then, and if it's over a certain percentage threshold, then it's considered new development.
So taking a house that existed in 1976 or whenever it was, and looking at all the changes that have occurred, and if it's more than 50% or
Right.
whatever it is, that constitutes essentially new development if it exceeds the 50% in my example, or and that's not something that we've actually incorporated.
We have not done that. No, that is not something that the city supports at this time.
Okay, thanks.
I could just add to that, because it's probably informative to the discussion. What Ms. Wehrmeister is referring to is the Coastal Commission's Residential Adaptation Planning Guidance document. And months ago, I met with the executive director of the Coastal Commission, along with a couple council members and other representatives from the commission. And we conveyed our knowledge from our process on the ground that there's a significant amount of confusion and concern in the community about what the RAPGs are saying or not saying, and recommended that the Coastal Commission come to town, hold meetings, inform residents about the content of that document, and just, do more outreach before the commission itself, the Coastal Commission itself, considers, adopting that guidance. And subsequent to that meeting, the Coastal Commission, and I know Representative is here tonight, could maybe speak to it, did go back and revisit their timeline and their process for developing the RAPGs. They're not being considered by the full commission before the end of this year. I don't know what the timeline is, but just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Stegging?
Moving forward, I definitely support, I believe it was my fellow Commissioner Niblin's support for plain and simple language on here. While the binary softer versus harder armoring is kind of familiar to those who have coastal land use planning, it might be rather fuzzy to those who had been to this meeting for the first time today, and just make those as in layman terms as possible. Thank you.
Commissioner Clifford.
There are several policies, I think, that talk to monitoring of both the conditions on the coast and also any of the new developments that might be put in place. Who actually is going to be doing that monitoring?
There's some monitoring that will be put on the property owners to conduct and report to the city. But some of the monitoring, some of the policies talks about monitoring that the city would have to either hire or sub out those efforts.
Is this going to be annual, semi-annual, biannual?
So each policy describes the frequency of the monitoring intentions.
Okay.
So some are every 5 years. I think the high watermark is the frequency of the high water program is not yet defined. That would have to be created. The mean high tide line, I believe, is every 10 years. And so it depends on the policy.
Depends on which one. Okay, thank you very much.
I just have a question, and it's for the sub-area policies and programs of the current local coastal plan, the one that we're discussing tonight, and it's for Sharp Park, West Fairway Park, and Maury Point. And I see you've taken out anything with regard to managed retreat, and I see here that you've got Hazard Policy 24 encourages berms and armoring, and sand nourishment, and then you've got upgrade existing shoreline structures, sand retention structures, that's Hazard Policy 27, you got Hazard Policy 28, Clarendon Avenue Stormwater Basin and a pump station. So a lot of infrastructure coming in, and I'm just curious what the general plan is for funding of kind of the hard, these like sand nourishment, these capital improvement projects that are they currently in the city CIP or?
Some of them may, but most of them are not, such as flood protection for Clarendon. It's like an ongoing problem. So the funding is the next step in implementing these policies. So we would either be looking for new local funding and tax measures of some sort, or potentially looking for grants, of course. And we're already in the process of doing that and have gotten several grants for other hazard mitigation programs, such as on Esplanade.
Thank you. City Manager.
Yeah, sure. I'll add to this, because this question has come up at numerous of the public meetings as well. And yes, the funding, all of these projects and measures, protective measures, are immensely expensive, way beyond what Pacifica's budget would be, and this is the case for every one of the 61 coastal cities in California. It goes way beyond local means to fund these, and that's why that drives sort of the importance of getting policies in place. So we have a tool to go out and leverage with federal funding from the Army Corps, with state funding, with regional-based entities, county and other regional partnerships, as well as local funding. And I think in the end, there's going to have to be a blend of all of those sources of funding to make these a reality.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any more lights up here. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. To staff, I would like to follow up just on that recommendation. I forget who, maybe it was Commissioner Nevlin, about maybe putting some of the key excerpts of information up on the website. Just here's the map, here's the red line map, here's the, I don't know, maybe frequently asked questions on why managed retreat's not in here anymore, things like that. Why, maybe explain a little bit clear that this isn't the end of the road. Sounds more like the beginning of a process. This is just the first chapter, so might help alleviate some of the understandable confusion out there that I shared when I was looking through this as well. So anyway, I think we're at the end of this meeting. So any more questions for staff? Anything, any procedural questions? I don't see any, so I guess we're going to have a council, please.
On my agenda, I have staff communications and
Oh, yeah.
communications.
I was just going to close this part of it. I'm going to close this. Yeah, I wasn't going to end the meeting. But I'm going to close this consideration item and move on to communications. So commission communications. None? Staff communications.
Commissioner Communications, there's one.
Oh, you did? Oh, I didn't see your light there. Okay.
And just to be crystal clear, this is completely separate from the sea level rise.
Yes, please.
I have a question. When we spoke on Pedro Point, there was a new development on the Pedro Point Shopping Center, and there was some discussion of a surplus lot Caltrans owned, whether that could be converted or whether we could approach Caltrans to use that lot for additional parking on Pedro Point. And I'm curious if we've reached out to them, if we've discussed that further.
Yeah, do you have an update? I don't.
It's the one, it's the, in the corner.
Yeah, so City Manager Woodhouse has an update, but just to be clear, it appears to be a lot when you're out there, but it's actually excess right-of-way. So Caltrans would need to go through the process to actually make that real property and to be able to then transfer it. And so then I believe the City Manager has an update from there.
Yeah, nothing really in detail, but a while back, we had a meeting with Caltrans to talk about a number of issues, and that accessing of that property was one of them, and we, in a letter to Caltrans, formally requested that they look at that process of accessing that parcel, because the city, as well as other partners, may be interested as trailhead parking for the future coastal trail connection from Pedro Point over to the other part of the trail south of there. I forget what the name of that. Yeah, Devil Slide, exactly.
Great. Thank you. Can you give us an idea when the Higgins Way project is going to come in front of us?
The Higgins Way project, there's been rumors about a new project off of Higgins. Is that the one you're talking
18
about?
homes on Higgins? Or?
Yeah, there's no application, so there is no timeline. We did have somebody come in and talk to staff about it, but there's been no formal application made.
Okay. You had mentioned that at some point 7-Eleven was coming back. Can you tell us what they're coming back for?
7-Eleven is coming back. I can't recall.
No worries. Secondly, we've discussed this, I think, robustly. There was a comment 3 times, and if anyone is interested in putting forth a motion to expedite single-family home remodels under 50% square footage, I'd be happy to offer a second, but if no one's interested in doing that, we can move forward on there.
I wouldn't mind seeing it agendized as a standing item or as an item on the regular agenda, but I wouldn't want to do it under communications.
When do you think it should be done?
I defer to staff as to that, but I'd certainly be supportive of it coming as an item on the regular agenda as a discussion item.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Commissioner Wehrmeister, Bonnie, and of course Christian Murdoch, who's always very prepared, very professional. This will be one of my last meetings as a planning commissioner, and me resigning. I'd like to continue through the end of this council and have a smooth continuation for everybody if possible. You can reach out to me and let me know what that was. I'd like to thank each and every one of you that are here. I think the public doesn't realize what a burden this is. An awful lot of us here read every one of these 900 pages. I personally visited all of these zones. I've visited every single project that we've had there, and I know there's an awful lot of you that do a lot of research in there, and it's more than two nights a month. I mean, it can be 15 hours a month with no problem. We don't get a dime. There's no reimbursement, and some of you, Mr. Campbell and Commissioner Campbell and Commissioner Clifford, have been doing this for 10 years, and I'd like to thank you for it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Wow. Thank you.
So I had a light on. It occurred to me, as Commissioner Stedging's good practice is to let folks know when he's had contact with folks around matters that were on the agenda. And it occurred to me, I did speak with Mr. Harris and Mr. Steckbart regarding the matter that we discussed this evening. I wanted that stated for the record. And I also just wanted to offer my thanks to Commissioner Stedging. An unexpected surprise that you were going to be resigning your position, but your zeal for this is manifest.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. You're always extremely well prepared, and that was much appreciated. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Where were we? Were we in staff communications? Is that?
Yes.
No, yeah.
We're done with commission
quick
communications.
Yeah, staff communications.
So I
All
just
right.
want to let you know, at the last council meeting, the city council upheld the approval for the second marijuana use permit that the commission approved. That's for a lit LLC. And then lastly, due to making way for some of the districting meetings that council needs to have in their timeline, their strict timeline, we are canceling our December 17th Planning Commission meeting, and instead you can come to the City Council's districting meeting on the 17th. Oh, and the reorg is going to be on the 2nd.
And the reorg. All right. All right, thank you. Okay, we've had commission and staff communications. Commissioner Neblin.
I move that we adjourn.
All right, Commissioner Clifford.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we've had a motion, second, please vote. Unanimous. All right, thank you. This meeting is now over.
Tempted to disagree one last time on the adjournment.
Right there at the office, man. Just a picture once you have one. Right. Say again, man?
I was going to ask.
It's all gonna be good. Maybe you'll have a Thanksgiving baby.
Thank you.
Well, actually, yes, Thanksgiving's a moving target, so it'll be Thanksgiving. Well, actually, yes, Thanksgiving's a moving target, so.